sometimes it's almost like trying to tiptoe across the pond and step on the stones without falling all the way in and getting fully immersed. So with that in mind, it's really a matter of what your palate likes. But a lot of times when I'm barbecuing, and my wife Peggy knows this, is that I start off drinking beer while I'm outside, slaving on those hot coals for hour after hour trying to prepare that delicious meal. Come on now, that's all I can do. That's all I can say. But and then transform into a lighter wine with maybe appetizers or the front end of the dinner, and then maybe a little bit of a heavier wine, and then a sweet wine to finish with. But rosé is the wine that's typically prescribed for summertime wine drinking. And people here in mid-Michigan, and maybe even in Michigan overall, really don't have a great understanding of those wines. And rosé is a term that goes all the way back to probably our parents and grandparents, and it used to represent a term that really was associated with a wine that was pink and a wine that was cheap, and you'd spend $6 and get about 2 or 3 liters of it, and it would have kind of a plonky flavor and finish sort of dry, and it was okay, but it was something you could either do or not do without. Nowadays, a rosé wine is associated with a really super fruit-forward flavor, almost like biting into a fresh Michigan strawberry or raspberry or something like that, and then that wine will typically finish mostly dry. So it'll be very, very balanced, very sweet up front, very dry in the back. And those wines should be drank very, very cold. And much unlike a lot of your white wines that shouldn't be that cold, you want to enjoy those really, really cold. A lot of times those wines will also have a little bit of spritz or frizzante to them. And that little bit of spritz, that little bit of sparkling nature will help refresh your palate when it's hot out and set you up for the next bite of a barbecued rib or some barbecued chicken or a big old fat bratwurst or something along that line. But
it's making me hungry.
Yeah, I'm kind of hungry too. But at any rate, summertime wine, summertime things, they kind of go with the season. You can use wine in the summertime to enhance fresh fruit. You can take blush wines and actually cut a hole in a watermelon and glug glug glug, drain it right in there and have electric watermelon. You can do that. You can try slices of cantaloupe with fresh different types of wine. There's all kinds of different stuff you can do it. You can take dessert wines like Moscato or even ice vine if you can find one that's a little bit more economical, and pour those over fresh fruit, chill it down a little bit, and you have a dessert that's almost made in heaven. You can also use those items to bake with and create like shortcakes and things like that to put fresh fruit over. So really, during the summertime, the only thing that really isn't in the most vogue is room temperature red wines that have a tendency to make you warmer from the combination of the warm wine and the higher alcohol. Otherwise, the playing field is wide open, and in a lot of cases, in maybe 2 hours, you might enjoy a nice beer, and then perhaps a nice gin and tonic or something like that, and then something else after that. So just keep in mind that moderation is the key. But enjoyment is the key when you're with friends and family, particularly with the 4th of July coming up this year.
So my question to you, Greg, would be, what time are we expected for dinner?
And just when does the wine start being poured? We'll just show up.
Anytime is wine time.
Thank you, Misty,
Typically, when I do wine tastings, I start off by asking everybody, how many days a week do you enjoy wine? And I'll start off, all right, everybody raise your hand, and I'll say 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. And by the time we get to the 7th day, I'm usually the only one, with the exception of some older woman that's grinning sideways that still has their hand up. And that's Deb. Oh, I'm sorry, Deb. But with that in mind,
he did not.
I only drink at 4 or 5.
4 or 5.
4 or 5
times a day.
Shh.
That reminds me of the old question where they asked the guy, he said, do you have a drinking problem? And he says, I only have a drinking problem when I can't get a drink.
Right, when I can't get the damn bottle open.
Exactly.
This is true.
Exactly.
So, you mentioned finish. Explain finish to us.
Well, finish is like anything
from
else.
Finland.
I think one of the things from Finland.
Finish.
Well, there's finish and then there's a finish. But usually when you look at tasting wine, there's a five-step process that I like to use in wine tastings that all the words start with S. First of all is sight, then it's swirl, then it's sip. All right. And I think actually if I don't have it written in front of me, I get it mixed up times. So it's sight, it's swirl, it's smell, it's sip, and then it's savor. So on the fifth S, or the savor step, that's where you're going to, really get that finish. And that finish is that flavor that you get all the way in the back of your palate when all the other flavors have come together. That nice fresh fruit and sweetness up front, the bitter, acrid, sour, salt, any of the other flavors on the sides of your tongue, and then that mostly dry, semi-dry, or not dry at all finish that comes on the back of your palate. And that would be, once all those things were lumped together, much like a math problem where you'd come up with a solution or an answer, that would be your finish. And every kind of wine finishes differently. And if you had 15 different people and they all tasted the same wine, they might all come up with a different description of how that wine finished, because there is no right answer in this, and everybody tastes things differently. But usually the finish is the net result of all the flavors coming together. And then if you've been eating food with that, the finish would be a combination of the cuisine that you prepared to go with that wine, combined with the flavors that the wine created in your mouth, all right, with that food. And that's why wine is such a great accompaniment to dinner, because it sets your palate up for each and every bite and allows you to taste things separately versus just one big, let's eat it quick and be done and go flop on the couch sort of a thing.
Right, that's a good point.
Yeah, but everybody likes to go flop on the couch.
Yeah, but when you work hard on a meal for your special significant other, it's nice to know that you can sit down, or your family, and you can enjoy it together, and take a little bit of time out from your busy day, and really have a chance to have some conversation outside of playing around with your phone and answering emails all day and all the other things that, for whatever reason,
that's a whole nother show.
Have kind of taken up our modern day lives.
Yep.
Thanksgiving is like that. That tryptophan that's in the turkey.
I think this year when people come for Thanksgiving, they're going to have to leave their cell phones in a little basket and actually talk, I think. Mm-hmm. So what about wine corks? Number one, when you open a bottle of wine, should you smell the cork?
Well, smelling the cork is kind of old school wine stuff, and I know that that's where you come from, is more old school.
Wow, you're just on my age.
No, I'm not at all. In fact, if anybody out here hasn't actually met Deb, she's actually only 21 and a half. All right, she has a very, very kind of like mature outlook on things, but she's the youngest mature woman I've ever met. I mean, actually, I think she's aging in reverse, I think.
So, okay, you've gotten back on my good side now. Keep going.
As far as a cork is concerned, the cork or the closure of wine is the guardian of the wine. And as earlier stated, that wine completes the vacuum that protects the wine. In centuries-old, age-old tradition is the cork. And for those of the listeners out there that aren't aware, cork comes from a tree. And cork is expensive, and most of the best cork trees are all in the old world, in Europe and Italy, various parts, Spain, all over in that area. However, cork is starting to be grown and harvested in California as a result of being planted some 25 years ago. But cork can, in wine bottles, can be a lot of different fashion. They can be composite corks made of a lot of little pieces of cork. They can be not cork at all and be vinyl. They can be plastic. They can be all kinds of different newfangled, combobulated different things to protect wine. And then they can be what they used to be in the beginning, is one solid piece that's cut with a die out of the bark of a cork tree. But the most probably revolutionary thing that's happened in the wine business over the course of the last 25 years is the metal closure. And there's always going to be an ongoing argument between purists who say, well, a good bottle of wine needs to have a cork in it.
Yes.
And then others that'll say, well, that's not necessarily true because these metal closures do just as good a job. Well, here's my slant on it, is that if you had, let's say that we made the Deborah St.Hilaire wine, the Divalution wine. If you use corks in that wine, the accepted failure rate for that is about 3 to 5% because of taint, or defective corks, or because of bacteria. If you use metal closures on those same wines, you'd probably have less than 1/4 to 1/10% of failure. I've never encountered
impressive.
I've never encountered a failed wine with a metal closure. And for listeners that aren't aware, a metal closure has a plastic insert in it, or not necessarily plastic, but a material like plastic that imparts no flavor and basically protects the wine, and it requires a simple snap of the wrist, and then the wine is open versus having to use a corkscrew. What goes wrong with corks is the fact that they become tainted for lots of different ways or different reasons. And some of the things that come along with a tainted wine are flavors and smells of a wet dog, flavors and smells of nasty, wet, moldy newspaper, or perhaps flavors and smells of that area of the basement or some other area of your home that never seems to be quite right and smells funky, and no matter what you do, you can never get it right. Maybe it's in the bathroom or somewhere else. And if you've ever encountered wines like that, you might not have even realized that they were tainted or wrong, and you just thought, well, I blundered when I went to the store and bought something I didn't like. So with that in mind, if you encounter those flavors, listeners, in the future, one drink of that wine should tell you that it's wrong. Put the cork back in it and take it back to your wine vendor. That wine is tainted or flawed. And that will not go away. It will not blow away. It will not change enough to make that wine palatable. I've been at wine tastings where people have brought $100 bottles of wine, and much to their dismay, the wine was tainted, and those flavors that I just spoke about were so distinct. And if you get those on your palate, unless you go brush your teeth, you won't even get rid of them off your palate. They'll just get more concentrated and worse as you go along.
Well, remember the old days, they used to tell you to lie them down lie wine bottles down, not to store them standing up, and in wine cellars of a certain temperature, because people aged wines. Mm-hmm. That's not really true anymore, is
Everything is processed so that it stops at the when they sell it.
Well, that's not necessarily true. The big difference there is, first of all, on that subject, before I answer that question, understand that the United States has been number one in wine consumption now for 3 years in the entire world, and that's mostly because of the Divas and all their friends out there. So keep up the good work, okay?
Thanks. We've been trying.
But
with that in mind, even though that a lot of Americans are very knowledgeable about whatever wine they like, all right, they're not very knowledgeable about wine as a whole, okay? So if you could go out and learn just a little bit about wine, you would be more knowledgeable. Let's say just arguably 5 or 10% of all the available knowledge. You'd be smarter than most everybody about wine. And that's a thing that I always encourage people to do, is with the internet being so available, look up your favorite winery, find out a little bit about it, see where it comes from, see some of the different things that are that make it special, something other than where to find it, in whether it be at Vino or your favorite store or whatever else. So knowledge goes a long way in your understanding about wine, and there's so many different types of wines out there that it's nice to be able to be knowledgeable about a different part of the shelf, so that when you go to buy wine, you know that the money you're going to spend will be well spent on something that you actually like. Now, I got off on that tangent about understanding wine. What was the actual question you asked me?
Remember, they used to
about laying
have
the bottles
wine
down.
cellars,
Absolutely.
And then I have had a bottle of wine go bad, and you're right, it is totally disappointing because the cork leaked.
Right. And the primary difference now is that back when I first started selling wine as a wholesaler, which was in 1989, a lot of your best red wine producers from both U.S. and the old country, at various places in Europe and others, their style was making these huge wines that they felt needed to lay down and age and change. All right. Well, very quickly, American winemakers figured out that doesn't make a lot of sense. I want to make you a bottle of wine that Deb and the Divas will buy today, enjoy today, and come back tomorrow to buy, not buy today and enjoy in 15 years. All right, that's going to be difficult for any business to survive with that.
Well, hell, I'm old. I might be dead by then.
Exactly, and that's alcohol abuse. Again, a figure that a lot of people don't know is less than 5% of all the wine that's made in the world gets any better by aging. All right,
less than 5%.
Less than 5%, and particularly with today's winemaking style of being super fruit forward with these bright, shiny penny flavors, those wines are meant to be consumed now. And no, they're not going to fall apart in a minute or in a month or whatever. But typically, a lot of these wines really have a shelf life, if they're stored correctly, away from direct heat and direct light, maybe 2 to 4 years at best before they start to decline. But, wines laying on their side with a real cork in it, that keeps the bottom of the cork wet. Right. And so that accomplishes the seal, and that accomplishes that vacuum that we spoke about before.
That was
wow, great. It's already a half an hour. And it always goes quickly when Greg Kimbrough's here. Hey, if you have any questions for Greg regarding wine, you can call in at 989-402-5414. We'll be back with more Wine Talk with Greg Kimbrough of Vino.